I notice around here my book is called The Death of Character, which is actually James's book. James and I are going to write a sequel. We're going to merge The Death of Character and The Road to Character. It'll be The Road to Death. It'll be a big bestseller, sort of a sequel to La La Land. My standard line is that writing a book on character doesn't give you good character, and reading a book on character doesn't give you good character, but buying a book on character does give you good character. So what I'm going to do is, Anne and I wrote this book together a few years ago, and at the end it was called The Road to Character, but I think neither of us are quite happy with the word character. It sounds sort of stuffy and stodgy. And so a lot of what I think a lot of people have done is just trying to figure out what this vague word means and what framework it is. And there's a lot of imposing a framework and then trying to get a different framework just to clarify this fuzzy thing. And so that's what I'm going to try to do just for 15 minutes. And for speakers, you should know the countdown clock is actually counting up, so you can speak forever. And I will try it to apply it to the people who are our practitioners. I went to a school called the University of Chicago where we had a slogan, a T-shirt, "Sure it works in practice, but does it work in theory?" And so I will try to merge the two. Now, we all have an idea of character, which is individualistic Victorian version, that reason is the charioteer steering the passions, and reason holds back the passions, and out of that you get character. And so character is sort of like a moral muscle. You go to the gym to work out. Character is basically self-discipline, self-control, willpower, and self-restraint. And I think of all the versions of character, this is clearly the most bogus. That if this version of character as self-restraint worked, then New Year's resolutions would work, and they don't. And so I thought I might walk through how I think character develops, and especially what are the pressure points at which we can hit it. And we're going to start with our inborn nature. We're social egotists. We're cooperative creatures. If you took a baby, there was a University of Washington study, they took a baby at 39 minutes old, and the doctor wagged his tongue at the baby, and the baby wagged her tongue back. She didn't know what a face was or a tongue, but she knew how to imitate. We imitate each other. Babies cry when they hear other babies cry, but they don't cry at recordings of their own cry. It's just basic cooperation. My Yale colleague Paul Bloom takes infants and he shows them videos. The video shows a triangle trying to climb a mountain, but there's a circle pushing the triangle down. And babies get that the circle is being unhelpful, and they don't like circles after that. So there's some basic sense where we are social and cooperative. There's also a basic sense where we're kind of selfish. I thought David Foster Wallace put it best in his famous Kenyan commencement speech, which says, all of the world every day looks like it revolves around me. I see you from the perspective of me, I see him from the perspective of me, I see all of us from the perspective of me. And so we are all slightly selfish and a little bit dishonest. Dan Ariely studies dishonesty at Duke, I think. And one of the things he did was when he was at MIT, he put dollar bills in the dorm refrigerators, and then he put Coke cans next to them. And he'd come back in a few days, and all the Coke cans were stolen, but none of the dollar bills. Because people feel free taking a Coke can, but it feels like robbing to steal a dollar bill. And so the rule is we all steal as much as we can to maintain our self-image. The Kennedy Center has a gift shop in Washington, and they were losing $150,000 a year from a gift shop that was staffed entirely by volunteers. And they were wondering, who is stealing all this money? And so they put in surveillance equipment, and it turned out everybody was stealing the money. Almost every volunteer was pocketing a little money. And so dishonesty is somewhat pervasive. We're all a little bit dishonest. I came across a quote from a locksmith. 1% of people will always be honest and never steal. Another 1% will always be dishonest and will always try to pick your lock and steal your television. The rest will be honest as long as the conditions are right. But if they are tempted enough, they will be dishonest too. Locks won't protect you from the thieves who can get into your house if they really want to. They will protect you from the mostly honest people who might be tempted if you didn't have a lock. And so we're somewhat social, but also somewhat selfish. And so character's a problem. And yet one of the things we do is we bond. We bond with each other. And in my view, and this is my next book, we make 5 big bonds in our life, 5 big commitments. To a spouse and family, most of us, to a faith or philosophy, to a vocation, to a community, and to our friends. And so those commitments are at the core of who we are. We survive on the basis of those commitments. It's because parents can commit to their children that babies grow up and live. And our identities are formed by those commitments. If you ask people who they are, if you ask who you are yourself, the answer you give is going to be not some innate trait. It's going to be what you're committed to. And so at base, in my view, character is our ability to keep the commitments we are enmeshed in. Character is basically keeping commitments. James Q. Wilson put it well, character is fundamentally relational. And he wrote, when a child forms friendships, he takes on commitments to peers and expects commitments in return. Friends test one another in commitments with games and teasing. They challenge each other's self-control, sense of fair play, obligation to honor the group and its members. So when people are out on the playground, what they're doing is they're testing and improving each other's commitments. And they're seeing who can be trusted in times of trouble. And so at the first level of character, it's just, you can count on me. It's just, you can count on me. It's staying faithful to the commitments. And that's the bottom level. And so the first pressure point, if you want to affect people in their character, the first thing is to give them a sense of attachment, a sense of strong attachment, to surround them with strong loves to which people want to remain faithful. We have a friend who has worked with youth all his life, a guy named Bill Milliken. And Milliken was asked, you've been doing this, what programs have you seen that change and transforms a child's life? And he says, I've been doing this for 50 years, and I've never seen a program change a child's life. Only relationships change life. And so it's those programs that build strong relationships, that create attachments and nurture loves. The second is the things like what happens in the playground, which is encouraging people to have games and mentoring relationships where they can explore and work on their capacity for faithfulness. And so at this first level, character building is just about solidarity. But then, and here we get to the second level, when we get together, we don't just get together to be together, we get together to do something. People get together to achieve something, to grow crops, to raise a family, to educate the young, or to learn about character. And doing these tasks requires a second level of character traits, not just attachment, but self-control and self-discipline. These are the performative character traits: grit, self-control, thrift, modesty, moderation, the things that make you a good student and a good employee. And so these second group of character traits are inculcated famously by Aristotelian habits. We give people small acts of self-control, and then they develop into people who are likely to be self-controlled. The act is father to the virtue, as Aristotle said. And so what we do is we give people homework assignments so they learn to do their work every day. We have little acts of etiquette. You don't start eating until everybody at the table has their food, a little act of self-control. And if you can instill habits of small acts of self-control, you can encourage larger acts of self-control. The rigors of team sports. Paul Tuff, who I'm sure a lot of you have read, had an example in one of his books of a chess coach at IS 318 in New York, and she taught what Tuff calls the non-cognitive skills simply by teaching chess. And she never had to talk about character in this level. She just talked about self-discipline and becoming really good at chess, and character came in through the back door. And so these performative character traits like grit and self-reliance are the second level of character building. One of the problems in contemporary America is that we take this second level of character building, and sometimes it's all of character building. Over the last few years, and in part because of my friend Paul Tuff, the meaning of the word character has shifted, so it's no longer a deep moral virtue that makes you a good and virtuous person. It's a performative virtue that makes you good at your job. And that's diminishing. These performative virtues are parts of character, but they're not the whole thing. The third level of character is living a balanced life between your different commitments. We all live in a matrix of where things are pulling us in the opposite direction. Our commitment to our job versus our commitment to our family. Our commitment to the public good versus private happiness. Between God and nation, between different faiths, between different ideas, freedom and security, justice and mercy. And there's no rule for settling these balances when two things contradict. James Q. Wilson again. A good character, however defined, is not a life lived according to a rule. There rarely is a rule. It's a life lived in balance. The balance among the moral senses is to me more an aesthetic than a philosophical matter. It is aesthetic in two senses. It is a balance that is struck without deliberation or reasoned justifications, and in the character thereby formed, there is no clear distinction between form and content. So the people at this third level of character building, they have all these different things they're committed to, and they have to find the right balance. Being nice to their spouse, being nice to their kids, being nice to their friends. Sometimes it's just raw time. And so how do people find the balance? Well, the first thing is they live in dense organizations. Some schools that I go to are thin, and they don't really leave a mark in their students. But some schools are thick, and they do leave a mark, because there's an intense set of norms and cultural expectations that are fiercely imposed. And inside those norms, there's a set of priorities. A lot of what we do in life is figuring out, of all the things I love, what do I love most? Do I love my job most? Do I love money most? Do I love the truth most? And dense cultures create a set of priorities of what love is higher than the other. The second thing that creates that sense of priorities, which again is more aesthetic, is James's word, and the word that comes out here is moral ecologies. We often tell our students to come up with a value system for their own, find out what you believe. And if your name is Nietzsche or Aristotle, maybe you can do that. But most of us can't do that. We have to borrow somebody else's moral ecology. And fortunately, history and civilization has left us a lot of moral ecologies to pick and choose from. So one of the things schools can usefully do is say, hey, I'm not going to tell you what to believe, but here's a bunch of belief systems. You find one that's right for you. It could be the Greek system based on honor and courage. It could be the Stoic system based on the suppression of emotions. It could be the Hebraic system based on obedience to law and rational discernment. It could be the Christian system based on surrender to virtue and grace and agape. It could be in the Enlightenment system based on reason and finding morality through reason. There's all sorts of moral tributaries. There's Buddhism, and there's all sorts of moral ecologies and philosophies, and you just pick one, or pick two, or combine your own. And that's something schools can usually at least throw before students. And then there's this process. So mostly I've been talking about these first three belief systems, these three levels of pressure points, are mostly worldly. There are levels of attachment, there's levels of self-control, and there's a moral sense, honing one's moral emotions and one's moral sentiments to know how to balance your attachments. But we all get to a certain point in life where we have a crisis or we get a little deeper. And I've come to think life is often about finding your second mountain. Like we all start out in life climbing a mountain, and we're climbing the mountain to become a great academic or a great this or that. And then something happens in life, a death, a career setback, and you realize, actually, that wasn't my mountain. And the second mountain tends to be an internal mountain, and a mountain having to do with virtue and vice, right and wrong, grace and salvation. And that second mountain is the next level of character building. And that's the one that's hardest for us to discuss in a secular atmosphere. It often happens through the death of a loved one. People get their lives totally thrown off course, and they have to fall back on what's inside. Sometimes, and some of my students who are in their mid-20s, they went to Yale, they were successful at everything, they had a career setback, they got fired. I'm thinking of one of my kids right now. And everything fell apart. And so at the young age of 23 or 24, he's got a second mountain to find, because that career he thought he was going to have, he's not going to have. Some of it is by adverse circumstances. I've been studying people who are imprisoned. People like Dostoevsky, Václav Havel, Nelson Mandela. And they get everything taken away from the outer world, and all they've got is their inner world. And the best of them discover their second mountain at that moment. That we were talking about Viktor Frankl, who was in Auschwitz, and they could take away everything but his life, but what he called his inner whole, his response, is to be worthy of suffering and to treat suffering with dignity. And I was telling the story of a woman he spoke to in the camps who was dying in the infirmary, and she was losing her life, but she had a tree that was outside her window, and she told Frankel, "This tree is the only friend I have in my loneliness." And she said, "I often talk to this tree." And he said, "Well, does the tree talk back to you?" And she said, "Yeah, this tree does talk to me." And he says, "What does it say?" And she said, "Well, the tree says to me, I am life, I am life, I'm eternal life." And so everything was taken away, but she experienced the moments of transcendence that sounds like joy, even in Auschwitz. And so that is the next level of character development, is attaining the highest level of joy. There's a guy named Robert Spitzer who says we have 4 levels of happiness in this world. We have material happiness, having nice clothes, nice car. There's ego gratification, winning victories and achieving success, some status. Then third, there's generativity, the pleasure one gets back from giving back to one community. And the fourth and highest level of happiness is transcendence, feeling connected to a universal truth, feeling connected and enwashed in an unquenchable, unconditional love, and having a sense of one's purpose and place in the world. And to me, this is the highest level of character building. And it's not done because it makes you good at your job. It's done for its own self because it is the fulfillment of one's deepest nature. We don't have a word in this society for the sort of ambition that I think drives us the most, which is the ambition to lead a meaningful and purposeful life. C.S. Lewis called it joy. For him, joy was not realizing your desires, but having the highest possible desires. A hero of mine, Dorothy Day, called it loneliness, to be lonely for the highest possible life. But it's a sort of moral ambition that I see in all my students, I bet you see in yours. One of them said, "We're so hungry," because they want to feel their life has meaning. And as Nietzsche said, he who has a why to live for can endure anyhow. The only way they can get through the day is if they know why they're living. And they get glimpses of it in sensations of reverence. Sometimes they come across something that seems sacred and reverential. Sometimes they have moments of holy connection. I was struck by a passage by this guy, Rabbi Wolf Kellman, who was on the march to Selma. And he said, during the march, we felt connected in song to the transcendental, the ineffable. We felt triumph and celebration. We felt that things change for the good and nothing is congealed forever. That was the warmest, transcendental spiritual experience. Meaning and purpose and mission were beyond exact words. Meaning, feeling, song, movement. It was an overwhelming sense of spiritual fulfillment. We were experiencing what Heschel called the meaning beyond the mystery. And people have those moments where they taste something higher, and forever after they want to live up and be faithful to those moments. And so to me, that's the fifth and final pressure point of character building, which is you've tasted some sense of sacredness or holiness, and somehow you want to live up and be faithful to that moment. And so you've entered in a phase shift in your life. It's a different vocabulary, words like covenant instead of contract, words like vocation instead of career. It's a different logic. It's not like, what am I getting the most out of this as I can? It's rather a moral logic. Am I giving the most as I can? And so then there are things that are activities that help people stay current or deepen this sense of character building. Some of them are simply spiritual disciplines like prayer or meditation or journal writing. Some of them are acts of selfless service. Some of them are self-combat, identifying the core sin in oneself and then purging oneself of it day by day. Some of it's small groups of intense communion. Some of it is done in solitude through intense periods of self-reflection. But it is, to me, the highest form of character building, and it is the one without which none of the others really make sense. That unless one is aiming for this highest form, which is a spiritual and transcendental form, then all the others will seem incomplete. And that the people we really admire have taken this highest form and internalized it into their normal aspect of day. There's a New Yorker writer named Larissa I can't even pronounce her last name, McFarquhar, I think it is. And she writes about extreme personal heroes, people who save amazing numbers of people out at sea at shipwrecks, who help people through the Holocaust. And what's interesting about them is they'd internalized morality into their identities. So they couldn't imagine not doing it and still being who they are. What's amazing is they're amazingly calm about what they did, and that they do not see it as any way remarkable. And there's a passage from Albert Schweitzer, who was a doctor in Africa, and he said, when I'm recruiting for my hospital, I do not want any moral heroes. I don't want people thinking they're doing anything heroic. I want people to serve humanity just the way as if they were just doing the dishes. It just seems normally. And he said, there are no heroes of idealism, there are only heroes of renunciation. And so I'll just close with a thought, which is I deal with kids at 18 to 22. A lot of you deal with them a little younger when you can actually make a difference. And you sometimes wonder, how can I instill something as deep in character in their lives? If you teach them math, you can sort of see the results. But if you're trying to teach character, what do you see? And I had a professor in college, or a professor who was at my college named Carl Weintraub, who on his deathbed wrote an email to a friend of mine, said, all my life I tried to teach certain books, and I tried to give the students the sense of the sacredness and the importance and the blood and sweat and toil that the authors poured into them. But sometimes for my students, I would just hear back, and it just sounded like they were pushing around air. I tried to make a difference in their lives, but I'm not sure I did. And that's often the sensation you get when you're teaching character. But I do think, and if you think back to our own lives, to our own school experiences, there are not many 16-year-olds, there are not many 20-year-olds who can experience the sort of transcendence and spiritual discipline I can describe. But I do think we can plant seeds and make them aware of things. And it's just in the process of making them aware this level exists. There are moral exemplars who have tasted this. And that when we do that, when the bad stuff happens later in life, I had a student say to me, suffering really helps character. Should I go out and find suffering? And I said, don't worry, it'll find you. And I do think if we plant those seeds at each of these different pressure points, then when the bad stuff happens or the really good stuff happens, then we will have done something to change their lives. Thank you.